The first use that we started using GIS for in the district was for ADA ramps. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, but there's a very big push to anytime you provide sidewalks to the general public that you have to also provide access to the disabled. And so there's a huge push to get all of our sidewalk ramps compliant. In this case, there is no ramp. And so what we would do is, and I'm sure you've all seen something very similar to this, where we've got some relatively flat slopes on the ramps. We're using detectable warnings, this sort of thing, all the things that it takes to make a ramp compliant. Well, as you can imagine, if you look at our entire district, which is a ninth of the state, there's literally thousands and thousands of these locations. So how can we possibly get all of these ramps compliant? And how can we keep track of what we've got? There's a requirement that anytime we do any kind of project, even a simple resurfacing project, that we're required to make the ramps compliant. And so we needed a really good system where we could do that. So a few years ago, our construction personnel went out with just hard copies. At that time, we didn't know about Collector. If we did, we would have used Collector. But in any case, we've got literally like a stack of paper like this thick full of forms of the inventory of all of our locations. So currently we're adding every ramp to GIS. And once we do that, we'll be able to bring in our projects, look at the ramps, determine how many ramps can we do this year within our project limits, and then how many separate contracts are we going to have where it's just for ramps only. And even graphically, it just makes something very, very complicated seem very simple. So that was our first use. The next use is actually our very first use, what we started 2 years ago. And that is we're able to take all of our projects and visualize them daily through dynamic segmentation. We worked with the GIS team, figured out a way where we could point to the state's database, the data mart, which contains all of our job information in a database system called our PPS system. And that system has some information that's very important. And as you know, it's spatial data that's important. You can have any amount of data, and if you have some spatial information assigned to it, you can very easily get that information out onto a map. And so what we're doing is we're running a process each night, and it goes out and it looks at that PPS system. And if our programming unit made any changes, those changes automatically are reflected here. And the reason why that's so important to us internally is because, all of us are designing highway plans, and if you're in program development, or if you're not a designer, you're in some position to where you're supporting the designers. And so what that means is you have to be very good at prioritizing, because you'll be assigned roughly 25 projects, and that's a lot of projects to keep track of, and there's a lot of things that we need to know about the projects to make sure that we meet our letting dates. And so what this system does for us is it allows us to use web apps and make this information available to anybody in our district that wants it. So if a project gets pushed back a year or two, everybody knows it. So you can immediately reprioritize your work. If you're in a different bureau, like say operations, and our operations personnel, our maintenance people are considering some minor fix, they can bring this up on their phone, and they can see that we've got a project coming up, and they may choose not to do that work because they know exactly what we're doing. And what you'll see with GIS Online is you start to use it and you bring everybody on board, and everybody's, you start sharing out this data with one another, you find that it's what it is. It's a really good communication tool. Okay, this next map gives you an example of another way that we can use the same data. So we're taking that project information, and some of the attributes that I'm talking about would be questions that would be asked mainly of our designer, such as, okay, you're designing a roadway project. Do you need to buy property? If you do, then that's very important because it takes about 24 months just to go through the whole process. I mean, that seems like a really long time, but if you think about all that needs to go into doing something as simple as buying a piece of property, you first need to know how much property that you need. So these are right-of-way limits. You need appraisals. You need to negotiate. It's a really long process. And so it's very important that our designers get this information to our land acquisition department because they're the ones who are going to do all that work. And so what I did was just took the same layers that has our project information in it and just set the filter to say something like, show me only the projects that require right-of-way, or show me the projects where it requires right-of-way, but the limits haven't been sent to that department. And some of this might not make sense to you. It probably makes a little bit more sense internally, but something like, has this project been presented at the bi-monthly? Because every project has to be presented to the FHWA. And so that's very important. There's all these things you need to do. There's about 25 things that you need to do for a project to go to letting. And if you don't do one of these things, the project's not going to letting. So it's very, very important. And so when our managers are dealing with hundreds of projects and these projects continue to move around, this map allows them to just go in and simply just click on any one of these layers, and it instantly shows them the projects where that work has not been done in the time that it needs to be done. They can click on the project, find out who that project's assigned to, and then talk to them about getting that work done in time. Besides using the map for pushing out this project information, we're also able to go into ArcMap, because I think there's probably a misconception maybe with a lot of people that if you were to use, they kind of compare GIS Online to ArcMap like they're two completely separate different things. They're just different platforms, but you can go into any of these platforms and bring in the same layer. Right, so we're able to go into ArcMap. ArcMap has the ability to print out some really nice templates, really nice reporting capabilities. And so we've given quite a few of our managers the ability to go ahead and run their own reports. And then even if they don't want to go into ArcMap and run their own reports, then they can always find somebody that is willing to do that for them. The one nice thing I really like about GIS Online is that it offers really what they call self-service mapping, I guess. If you think about the history of GIS, the fact that it's been around for so many years, ArcMap primarily, you had a very, very small number of users, and then what was it, like maybe 10 years ago or something like that, where we started to see some web GIS. So I'm talking about maps that it's GIS information that's pushed out to everyone, but it's not individualized. It's not customized for one person. It's basically just general information that you could go into, and if it happened to have the layer that you needed in it, you could pull the information that way. So what GIS Online does, it takes that a step further. So it allows us to go around to every individual in our district, or at least every person with a very similar job title, and provide them a custom map. Because in a big organization like IDOT, we've got a ton of layers. There's a ton of information available. And then externally also. So like in this particular example, this is our land acquisition engineer's map. So of course, she's going to want to see that project information. She's also, interested, or not just the land ac engineer, but everybody who works in land ac, such as the plats and plans people. They might want to go into this and bring, point to the county's website and overlay the property lines. It has property information, that sort of thing, for example. Or they might want to bring in the layer that has the township and range and sections, all those kinds of things that would pertain to a land acquisition engineer. And so, over the last 2 years, this is what we've been doing, really as a hobby. Like I said, I'm a roadway designer, not a GIS person. Recently, I took a job as the CAD manager in our district, but previous to that, so everything we've developed in the last 2 years, up until this point, has really just been as a hobby. But it's really grown so much to the point where we just recently hired a GIS coordinator. And so what we hope to do to take this forward is to continue to work with every individual and find out, how GIS Online can benefit them. We want to put together a library of layers to let them know what's available. Then as we work with them, we'll render the map for them, set the filters. We do a lot of using custom attributes, so that allows us to only provide the information that they need. So we're not providing too much information, so we can kind of customize that for each individual. The other really nice thing I like about GIS Online, and GIS in general, is that you're overlaying layers. And so each individual, by having their own data, having the ability to bring in someone else's data and overlay it on yours, that provides a lot of great information, whether it's just graphically looking at it or running some of the analysis tools. And so just randomly, I chose this map. It's our geometrics engineers map. And so what you're seeing here is just that regular projects layer that we looked at earlier. But then you're also seeing a layer that's put out by our Bureau of Safety Engineering. And that is what they call the 5% safety tier report. And that takes place as a segment and then also as an intersection point. So what our geometrics engineer can do, and she's also our safety engineer, and so she's able to look at these high crash locations by overlaying the crash information, and then she can see immediately if the projects that we currently have programmed fall within the limits of those high crash locations, and if not, she starts seeing areas outside of that, then I know she has a separate pot of money that she uses to it's a safety, a pot of safety money that is meant to be specifically for this reason, and she's able to identify some of these other high crash locations that might not be within the limits of the projects that we have in our current multi-year program. The other way that we're using GIS Online, and that's with the Collector app. I know Pam and some of the others talked about the Esri suite, some of the apps that are available, Survey 123. We've heard about that one, Collector, Explore. Esri has a really nice suite of apps, and they're all useful in their own way. The one that we tend to use quite a bit is this one called Collector. And so the way that we use this is that, when you use this free Collector app, you're able to point to the layers that you already have within your organization. And your field personnel can go out. If they see a problem area, they can take a picture of that area. It's set up to add a few attributes such as the day, the route, a description of the problem, that sort of thing. And then they hit submit. And right when they do that, that then communicates to everyone, this particular location, this particular problem area. And so that way they can communicate that amongst their bureau. They communicate it to our programming department. they communicate it to everyone, and that's what's very nice about it. And that's just one use. Another way that operations would use this, and this is one of the last projects I had as a roadway designer, it's Illinois 99 up near Mount Sterling. They used it for scoping. You know, we always ask our operations people, because they're the ones who are out in the field all the time. You know, we'll tell them, hey, I've got a resurfacing project from here to here. Do you know of any problem areas? And so what they did was they used Collector, identified those problem areas, and then communicated that back to us by adding some photos and a description. And then on this particular job, once they got back to the office, they actually took their photos and brought it into Paint or something like that and kind of marked up in the photos a possible solution to that we might want to consider when we improve that segment of roadway. All right, the next use is our survey monument records. So what we've got going on here is, let me fast forward a couple slides. As I'm sure most of you know, the state of Illinois, when it was originally divided and the property was sold off, it was sold off. It's a big grid system, a township and range system of 6 miles by 6 miles, and then that 36-mile square, you know, is broken up into sections, one mile by 1 mile sections, and then they get broken down into quarter sections. So anyway, that's, of course, how the state of Illinois was developed. Well, then in the 1930s, when we came through and started building roads, of course, all those property owners wanted roads to their property, so they dedicated a portion of their land, you know, maybe some on one side of the section line, some on the other side of the section line. And that's how some, if you look at our roads today, you'll notice most of the roads are on section line, which is just fine. But the only problem that creates is that, you know, for land surveyors, any land surveyor, private or otherwise, or municipalities or whoever it is, they need to identify those section corners. Well, those section corners are in the pavement. And so there's usually some sort of brass disc or some identifier, some monument of some sort in the pavement. And so they need to find out where those monuments are located. And so the way that they do that, at least in our district, is they typically call our chief of surveys and they would ask him, hey, on this particular road, you know, a couple miles from some reference point, are there any known survey monuments? And so historically they would go to an Excel spreadsheet, you know, try to piece it together as far as what location they were talking about, and then they'd have to get back with that person requesting the information. So what we did was we just took that spreadsheet, which happened to have the coordinates of the location, so it was extremely simple to go ahead and just add that into GIS Online. So the way that we operate now is we went ahead and created a web app that's public facing, and then that way if our chief of surveys gets a phone call, he turns around and just emails out that link, and then that person requesting the information can, the person requesting the information can go out and look for themselves to see if there's a monument record. And then if so, the record is, it was on the previous slide, if you caught that as I was clicking through. This point has an attachment to it that's a PDF, and so they're able to get that information. The people that this also benefits would be our designers. You know, most every roadway that we're improving, we're going to correct the cross slope of the pavement. So as you can imagine, that means we're going to tear into the survey monument. So it's also important that they know where these monuments are located. And so again, this is just another layer. And then as we go on, you see this becomes a trend. It's like you have your data, they have their data, you can edit your data, they can view your data. If you use their data all the time, you bring it into your map, you save it to your map. If it's something that you just occasionally use, then you can just go out and add it. And we've got a lot of groups set up So it helps everybody find these maps. So even if you don't, or layers, even if you don't know what the name of that particular layer is, you're able to find it by going to these groups. Okay, the next use is guardrail inventory. You know, over the years, we've done a great job with inventory as it pertains to our roadways and our structures, but anything outside of the pavement, we really haven't done that great of a job of keeping an inventory of. And so for several reasons, over the last couple of years, we went ahead and inventoried all of our guardrail. And in this particular case, the primarily reason why we were doing that was because it has to do with the ends of these guardrails. We refer to them as terminals. Because, you know, guardrail protects us from hazards, but the guardrail itself can be a hazard. And so it's very important that we provide a terminal such as this, so when a car hits the end of that guardrail, it's not doing major damage. And so we've got, in our district anyway, or we had 620 of these terminals that are considered non-compliant by today's standards. You know, when they were built, they were compliant, but they're not now. And so the FHWA and our safety engineering people are really pushing us to get those non-compliant terminals replaced. So last year, they gave us $1 million to put towards this, which sounds like a lot of money, but really $1 million gets you about 200 of these terminals. And so we did a project last year where we replaced 200 terminals, but not just any 200 terminals. We had to first identify the ones that are non-compliant, and then next, knowing that we could only do 200, we didn't want to just do them all like in one county or something like that. We wanted to take care of the ones that are in the most dangerous, or, you know, potentially dangerous sections, and that would be ones with higher speeds. So we looked at things like interstates first, and then NHS routes with 50 miles per hour and greater, or NHS route, you know, this was kind of going down the line, and then regular state routes, and then unmarked routes. So we started at the top with the higher speeds. And the way that we were able to do that, again, using GIS, it goes back to how I started this presentation, and that's with our inventory. Our inventory contains the speed limit attribute. It contains our functional classification of the roadways. And so when you overlay your guardrail inventory layer with your highway layer that contains those attributes, of course, you can do a very easy spatial analysis. And that's what we did. And so we were very, you know, within 10 minutes or some ridiculous amount of time, we were able to identify the first 200 that we were going to do. And then what was nice too, now that we know we can go back and forth between GIS and CAD, we took that GIS data, we brought it in to CAD, we were able to create exhibits like this and construction plans. And now that we've completed 200, we still have that guardrail inventory into our system. Everybody knows where these non-compliant locations are. All they need to do is add in that layer. And I believe this year, I don't know if we got quite as much money to continue this program, but I know over this winter, our designers are going to be working on another project to try to address a few more of these non-compliant terminals. Looks like I'm about running out of time. I think this is my last slide, so just to finish this up, our traffic signals people who happen to be here today, they have three ways they want to use GIS Online. They're using it for traffic signal inspection, so we've got those layers set up for them. They're also using it for their flashing beacons, both the yellow flashing, the red flashing. You know, they need to know things such as, is it solar powered, is it electric powered, all those basic attributes. And of course, very importantly, they need to know if it's not operating. So they do inspections on these. They now have a way with all of these, both signals, flashing beacons, highway lighting, any of these, they're able to take that collector, go out in the field, inspect it. They don't have to write it down on paper, go back to the office, maybe enter that information, that sort of thing. While they're out in the field, they make that change right then and there. And so I think that's going to work out really well. And so anyway, that's a few of our uses at District 6.